It
It is.
All right, let's call this meeting to order. This is a joint meeting of the city council and the Newberg Planning Commission. Are we being recorded?
Yes,
We are being recorded for public record.
It's a good show up, without microphones.
You,
this is a microphone, camera, everything right here.
you want to,
And there's one right in front of you too.
do you want to go through a roll call, please?
Yes, I will. All right, Mayor Rosacker,
Here.
Counselor McBride,
Here.
I'm gonna do council and then planning. Counselor Floyd,
Yes, here.
Counselor Wheatley. Here. And counselors, Carmen, Newberg, and Yarnell Hallman are not here. And then for planning commission, we have Jason Dale. No, not here. Okay, we'll see. Lane Quinn. Laney Quinn, okay. Chris Wright.
Absent.
No, absent, okay. Linda Newton Curtis.
Yeah.
And Randy Ricker.
Here.
And
Nope.
who's, okay,
Mr.
and
Dale,
who's,
right?
and that's Commissioner, okay, Dale has arrived, and then Jose Villalpando,
Villalpando. Yeah.
Yeah, all right, so we'll,
All right, so since this is a joint meeting, not everybody knows everybody. Let's just go ahead and introduce ourselves. I am Mayor Rosacker, Bill, and, welcome.
You want staff to introduce themselves?
Yes, sir.
All right. So my name's Clay Downing. I'm the planning manager for the Community Development Department.
My name's Lainey Quinn, I'm a planning commissioner.
Mike McBride, Newberg City Council. Wayne Floyd, City Council, District 3.
Linda Newton Curtis, Planning Commission.
and Rachel Thomas, City Recorder.
James Dingwall, one of the assistant planners. Randy Ricker, Planning Commissioner. Will Worthy, City Manager. Jason Dale, Planning Commissioner.
Robin Wheatley, City Councilor.
Abby Stice, Student Planning Commissioner.
And there's a couple people in the back there.
Good name, Scott Siebel, Community Development Director in the audience.
Baby, Community Development Administrative Assistant.
I'm Lee Jensen. I'm the Executive Director of Case Newberg, your destination marketing organization.
So this is something obviously was on all of our radar this year. The new council, this is one of the things that we wanted to address, making sure that we have an effective and fair program running. Obviously, you guys at the planning commission made the same decision. So here we are. We did a lot of work with an ad hoc committee. It was very interesting to watch. As I said in the other meeting, nobody's gonna like everything about what we end up with, but everybody should like most of what we end up with, and is our goal. So that being said, Clay, take it away.
Okay. Did we want to do pledge of allegiance?
Oh, we sure did. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now, I'm happy to.
Okay,
On the program.
thank you.
All right. So
Keeping us in line.
sure thing. So first, James and I are going to be doing this presentation. We're using a couple of parts of it. So one of the things I just wanted to say that we really appreciate all of you taking the time to do a special meeting that's off of your regular calendars and doing one that's together. So outside of the typical format, we think that's going to be really good for each of your bodies because you typically engage at different parts of the process. I think it's going to be good for the public as we define the scope of work to really communicate clearly about what we're assigned and asked to do. And then we also just generally think it's going to be productive for each of you to hear from the others and what you've experienced because you've touched different parts of this dialogue that's been going on for, at least since I've been here, it's been going on for at least a year, probably a little longer. So, and there've obviously been just things and touches going on prior to that. So with that, James, is there anything else this is opening? Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about what the recommendation is for this one. And I don't have a clicker, actually.
No, so it will be me.
Thank you. So basically, the only thing that was shown in the RCA that was sent out today was this recommendation, receive information, provide feedback on vacation rental regulation updates, proposed scope of work, overview of rental scape monitoring software, and update of vacation rental activity in Newberg. So some of the basics, why are we making a big deal out of the scope of work? We're gonna have, depending on how much public input we get, sometimes this particular issue flares up a lot more than jurisdictions expect, so we really wanted to define it. We don't do it for every project, but we felt was important here. And because there's been a conversation that's led to this, we felt like, frankly, that is most of the scope of work is considering those recommendations that have come out and then showing everyone what procedures we're gonna follow in doing that. Some of the other parts, the rentalscape software that's mentioned there, James will be going over that in more detail, so you get a little bit of a look under the hood. So that's something that, it's not really something that we need legislatively to conduct, we're just doing it. So we've already come on board with this new software, we're gonna be using it so that we can keep an eye on getting information that we can't get from our own permitting data. So we're trying to fill in the gaps on the things that we don't know. And then also the last time that this has been brought forward to council, which is more recent than with the planning commission, was back in March, so some time has passed since then. We appreciate the time that we've had to work on other projects, but now we feel like we've got the bandwidth to do that, but we wanted to let you know where we're at since some time has passed. And so then on the next slide, we're gonna talk a little bit about some reminders about where we were in talking about these things. So some of the planning commission touch, there were a couple of specific meetings that came across last year in 2023, where one, there was kind of a consideration of what do we do about this and what is appropriate to do and when do we do it? And that led to a recommendation for a temporary moratorium. And so the planning commission said, we're getting uncomfortable with the comments that we're getting and our ability to do anything about it based on the code that we have in front of us. So we're going to recommend a temporary moratorium to the city council as one option for how that gets dealt with, where we put a temporary moratorium in place until draft code or amended code can be written. The other thing that happened was immediately after that, so the following month, the planning commission, they received our white paper, deliberated and provided a series of recommendations to us. So those were two of the big actions that happened last year. Then going to the city council on their first touch was when they received that request for a temporary moratorium. City council chose not to do that, but they did choose to create a short-term rental ad hoc committee. So that was a committee to look into this and start talking about that. And then you see on the last part here where we got together September, November, December, and February, that group got together to really try and dig in on those conversation points and the key items. And then they also created their own series of recommendations. Both the planning commission and the short-term rental ad hoc committee recommendations, those are both an attachment to the RCA that was sent out. So we wanted to make sure that you had those available in case you wanted to get into them. Also, a big chunk of the scope of work are the recommendations that came out from the city council. And a lot of those came from the short-term rental ad hoc committee, which also built on some of the recommendations from the planning commission. So then on the next slide, we go into a couple of other items. So other conversations that happened at the city council. So the March 4th date was when we basically got the assignment for work. And so that was where we brought all these things forward, rolled them up and had those recommendations and officially asked for that permission to work on this. We always have a series of projects that we're working on or kind of a portfolio of projects. We want to make sure we're not working out of line with what the city council thinks we should be doing. So that's part of why we went forward in that way, and kind of rolled those up, made sure they had a chance to look at it. And then the last touch was actually the city council. Community development department was not involved in this, but there was a hosted community listening session. And so that's something that is going to be rolled into the results we get from the community engagement activities that we're going to be doing in November and December. So we're going to include those because we feel like that is still valuable public outreach, even though we didn't facilitate it. It's still valuable and happened and seemed like there was a good turnout there. So we really want to respect that. So then on the next slide. So some of these project objectives. So if you look through the RCA and the scope of work, we put together some project objectives to go through here. And this isn't word for word what came out of the recommendations, but I wanted to note that items 2 and 3 were loud and clear at pretty much each level that we spoke with. So the compliance rates, whether that was permitting, whether that was vacation rental, TLT remittances, whether that's business licenses, we saw from the data that not everybody's following the same rules. And it seemed pretty clear that we would like everyone to follow the rules. So that everyone basically, if our hotels are paying in, if our bed and breakfasts are paying in, if our other short-term rental operators are paying in, we think that folks should be doing that across the board. So we want everyone following the rules, and that's kind of that number 2 item. Number three is improving knowledge about vacation rental home operations. So we heard from folks about reporting, getting feedback, continuing to monitor these sorts of things. That has to do with, for example, that Rentalscape software that we have is getting better knowledge. Making sure that we're sharing that with what our outcomes are with the city council in the future and as we go from year to year. So that sort of thing. So those are clear. But we felt we heard kind of as a through line for a lot of things is that we're a town that wants and welcomes tourism, but we don't want it impacting the way that our community is shaped and the experiences of our residents in a negative way. We want it to be a responsible growth of tourism where our residents still want to welcome tourism. We don't want to put them in a position where they don't welcome tourism because they're having negative experiences in their own neighborhoods. So that was something that we felt. And so that's really where that particular objective is coming from. James, did you have anything else you wanted to add on the objectives?
No, yeah, I think, the first objective really kind of sets the stage for tonight's conversation between the planning commission and city council on some of those conflict areas and overlaps and where this code amendment might, resolve some of the tension.
And one of the things, and I think part of one of the reasons that James is talking about tonight is what we're looking at with this project, a lot of it is policy oriented, because some of the operational stuff, we can just go. And we're starting to do that with some of the changes that we've got coming down the road, and we'll talk about those in some of the coming slides. But that objective one, to me, I think to James too, is largely policy oriented. And then policies 2 and 3 are likely a mix of policy and operational changes, but they might lean a little more heavily operational in my mind than they are policy, because some of them are just kind of just do it. So on the next slide, I think this is where we're gonna have James start talking a little bit about that scope of work and the tasks associated with it. And so what was shared there in both the scope of work document as well as some of the RCA documents.
So the code amendment project has 6 tasks, starting with the kickoff, which is tonight's joint meeting. Following this, we'll be holding 3 public engagement events in November and early December, including an in-person and virtual and general public forum, and then 1 forum really targeting operators, kind of also seeing kind of their feedback and thoughts on how these policy changes might impact them as operators, as opposed to just the general public and kind of community members' engagement. Following this, the policy concept development will kind of summarize that public engagement and then all the work that City Council, Planning Commission, ad hoc committee did over the past year into a summary of kind of the decision points, which will go before a City Council work session in January to kind of make high-level decisions on this is the direction we want staff to take on the draft code. Following kind of those initial council decisions, we'll start drafting code language and take that to currently scheduled for 2 planning commission work sessions in January to April. And then following those work sessions and finalizing the draft language, starting the legislative process with hearings at the planning commission and city council. And then implementing that new code tentatively for June of next year. And while all this is going on, starting last month, we'll be implementing some of these operational changes. So the Rentalscape platform that we'll see next, and then business license updates with OpenGov, and then some of the fee and other kind of operational elements will be ongoing throughout the entire project. So before we hop over to Rentalscape, does anyone have any questions about the project itself and kind of the scope that Clay laid out? Okay, so if we go to the next slide, we can start looking at Rentalscape. So the majority of the operational policy recommendations from the Planning Commission and ad hoc committee, as Clay mentioned, included enhanced monitoring and enforcement of vacation rental activity in the city. And one of the first ways that we've begun implementing this is by launching the Rentalscape tool, which identifies active vacation rental home listings and then tracks occupancy, reservations, rental rates, and even estimates transient lodging tax collection or amounts. And it's really a tool that will allow us to kind of verify the registration and kind of identify active, non-compliant rentals. So next slide. So the first level of analysis that Rentalscape provides is kind of a mapping of all the active listings, including verifying on their end that it is an actual listing that matches with an actual house that correlates with some publicly available data. And then we as the city can also upload zoning districts or other kind of hotspots or areas of interest to monitor kind of particular highlights at the city level. Next slide.
Oh, hold on just a second. I see on there the red mark, short-term rental unlicensed. How does that get there?
Yep, so we just had our first kind of setup meeting with Rentalscape, I think 2 weeks ago, and so how they identify kind of the unlicensed and verification has a lot to do with some algorithm kind of items that they have, and so as we fully implement it, we'll kind of be more taking data from them and then doing our own verification off of it. So kind of they provide some tools to kind of get us halfway to the verification, but then we'll kind of really be doing our own end with transient lodging tax, land use, permit.
So do you have any idea yet, or is it too early, of how many homes are how many homes are not registered? I mean, are we looking
We
at
do.
50 or 60, or do you have that?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, great, okay. All right,
Do you have the total numbers?
carry on, young man.
Oh, sorry.
Just like you,
Yeah.
So you talked about this being an estimate of, specifically the question I'm asking is regarding, amount of revenue they're getting off this. Do you have if it's an estimate, do you have a way to verify their estimations?
So I think that's kind of one area that we're still kind of verifying how we'll engage with the platform. So they use, and we'll see it on the next slide, kind of, they take snapshots of what rentals are being listed at, and then when they're booked, and kind of from those sources, they generate some of those estimates. But it sounds like that's kind of a balance of us still relying on the finance department and our own kind of internal data. And this being a tool that kind of highlights what we expect to see, and then if there's a discrepancy or somebody says we aren't active, we might use that, but I think we might generally tend to fall back on the city's data. And Clay, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
Yeah, so it'll be when this budget season comes around, it'll be our first time having an extra data source as opposed to kind of taking our existing trends, looking at our permit data and kind of doing one of these and we'll probably still be doing that, but we'll be doing it with a little bit of extra information. So I don't think it'll bring us to having 100% spot on those, but hopefully it'll help us forecast a little bit more accurately what it is. We haven't calibrated enough. One of the things that James is kind of talking about with this is we still need to go through and kind of go through the things that they're capturing and do some verifying on to what extent we're seeing what we think we're seeing, or we're seeing what they think we're seeing. So James is going to talk about that in the next couple of slides. With respect to the forecasting, it's just really too early to know. After a year or two with this platform, I think we'll be able to calibrate the level of accuracy we can expect. But every year after that, we'll feel a little more trued up probably, but we don't know exactly what algorithms they're using to come up with those forecasts.
Have other communities used this, and have you communicated with those communities to see their experience?
We have. So we were given 5 different references and we followed up with all of them. We did that with some of the other platforms that we were looking at, if they seemed like, or we didn't, I don't think we got to the level where we felt we needed to check references with other platforms, but we did demos with several other platforms. This one seemed like it was a nice combination of robust and fairly easy to use, frankly. We have unlimited licenses, which means we can allow code compliance to use it, we can allow finance to use it, we can allow community development. So we can have multiple uses across the city, which is a plus. Because what you're looking at there are the listings on the right. So if we did have to take code compliance action, all of a sudden code compliance can get involved in those sorts of things. So we want this tool to be multifunctional to the greatest extent possible. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did, but I'm also really well, thank you. And I'm also assuming that if multiple entities have the ability to go into this and track everything, that there'll be one person assigned who will have the overall kind of responsibility for looking at this on a regular basis?
I expect us to have a program lead. Right now, I feel like James is my likely candidate, whether he wants it or not, but we do have only so many. staff.
Finance won't
Right.
fight him for that.
So we'll see how it evolves, but I would expect us to always maintain a lead so that we know this is not some software that's just sitting in the background not being used
Right.
properly. But that we'll have a program lead that wants to do these sorts of
And-
things.
And I think also kind of in a few slides, you'll see kind of how much data it gives us. And so I think that we can kind of really kind of keeping in mind kind of not using data and kind of overextending how we're interpreting it and kind of really picking out what we need and what it's telling us versus kind of just relying on everything it has will kind of be important as we look at TLC and finance and kind of all the different areas that it has.
I think Councilor McBride, do you have a question?
Well, I was thinking maybe I'll wait till after you get done with the process.
And
All
I'm
right.
gonna come up here and point at things.
Okay.
I found a pointer.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
just tell me what to point at.
Okay, so if we go to the next slide,
Okay.
so kind of after that map level, it kind of includes data of each property for kind of all the different listings. So, for example, the top one, 709 East Franklin, is one property, but they're listed on Airbnb, Verbo, Vacasa, and so it kind of tracks where properties are being monitored. And so while there might be 200 listings, that's across 50 or so actual properties. And then it can go in and kind of say, okay, it's booked here. We don't know which platform it's booked on, but it's booked at one of them, kind of from this can zoom in there. But this kind of data export tool gives us some options to kind of filter and flexibility in how we monitor these properties that can then be exported and coordinated with our own permitting or tax or business license data.
So it's hard to read. Is that the top, there's what, about 7 of them. Is that all one property and those are the numbers?
Yeah,
on
yeah,
it? Is it
so
really?
they're all, and I'm not sure if the
From-
screenshot has it.
Here all the way
Different
down
platform.
here.
But
I'm sorry.
The different platform, like
Could be.
Verbo, Airbnb.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's.
It's not how many times it's been rented, it's how many times it's listed on various.
Yeah, that's.
Okay,
yep.
Rental. Yeah,
This is something that they track.
Yeah, so kind of they on their kind of, and that's where the algorithm kind of meshes with our data verification. It's kind of their tool goes and scrapes all the different platforms and tries to book things and sees where it is. And then they kind of pull back what they saw and try and max it with property tax records and more and make sure it's actual,
Okay.
All right.
actual properties. So we go on to the next slide. So then kind of from that list of all the different properties, each actual property has a detail view. And so here's where we can kind of see the photos that they have on their listings. And then on the left-hand side, there is on Evolve and Verbo and Airbnb. So you can kind of see how they're advertising it. So if they have a license with us for 4 bedrooms and then we see it's 6 bedrooms, that can kind of be a kind of prompt to go and see how they're aligning with their permits. On the right-hand side up top is where the Rentalscape service is kind of scraping. And so it's trying to kind of do fake bookings on the different calendar dates, seeing when it's booked and reserved and how much they're charging it for. And so that's where they go and pull that data of what's available when, what's being used and how often. And then they do some statistic down at the bottom there. So then on the next page, kind of still in this property detail, you can kind of see a history of kind of across the different platforms where they're listed. So the colors here are what platform and when was a listing posted, and then what dates was it actually booked. And then they also keep track of who's left reviews on what platforms. So if somebody says I wasn't renting, we could go and say, oh, someone left a review. Let's square the circle here and figure out what's going on. And then also provides a kind of a notes page where code compliance or planning could kind of keep track of engagement or conversations and kind of generate a more interaction history with the property. And then on the next slide, and this is kind of getting to the wealth of data that Rentalscape provides us. Kind of on citywide rentals as a whole, occupancy, income, again, estimated TLT tax, or even unit type or platform usage. And so this is kind of where we have a lot of data here, and we'll have to kind of pick what we need to use best to kind of serve our purposes. But they do a lot for us, and we can get a lot of
So
information.
It's showing the TLT tax down there as a estimate down there in the corner, I believe.
Let's see.
So just to make sure that we're not chasing around, this tiny percentage of the overall TLT. How does that compare to the overall TLT tax for
That was
the?
a great question.
For the city.
I don't have it off the top of my head. I believe the hotel number is, if I recall from the ad hoc.
That would only be a few percentile points
Yeah,
I
about
think like two or
of the
three.
grand total, yes.
Yeah.
3/4 or 80% was
It's
hotel
more about
versus.
fairness.
What was that, James? Did you say?
Yes, and that's where I was going.
I think hotels were about 79% or 80 at least.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you.
So on the next slide, we can kind of compare this with some of the data that we had at the city level. So kind of first off, so far this year, we've had 9 approvals, either type 2 by staff or type 3 by planning commission. And we're currently at 3 in review or submitted. So trending on a relatively same level as we have been seeing the past couple of years. And you can see as well that the active listings on Rentalscape, about a quarter of them are fully licensed. So all TLT, business license, and planning. Just a slightly higher percentage than all of the records that the city has. And then the other colors there are kind of different combinations of business license and TLT, planning and TLT, et cetera. In the table in the RCA, which we didn't put here, as of October of this year, the city has 87 properties that we have some sort of record on, business license, planning, et cetera. Rentalscape shows 57 active listings. And of those, 11 are not permitted at all. So we don't have any record on our side. So that would put us to 98 total, 57 that are actively operating and that somebody could book if they went on Verbo and found it. And then the next slide just shows the map, which will be, well, not as small as I thought it was going to be here, but so red are those completely unlicensed, untracked. Yellow are partially of some combination, and green are fully licensed. And then the squares there are the inactive that Rentalscape doesn't see any current listings.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So why would they be partially licensed? I mean, is that okay to be partially licensed, or is it? Or do
So
you-
I think some might be kind of grandfathered where they started operating in 2000. Some might just not have gotten their business license yet. Some might not know about TLT or something. So there's kind of, I think, a variety of reasons which the grandfathering items in the code project will hopefully up that number.
So theoretically, the goal would be, I'm assuming, to have everybody fully
All green.
licensed. Yeah, I get it. Okay.
And so one of the things I want to point out is I'm pretty sure when we looked at this one anecdotally, it's the Best Western.
Oh.
Right, so there could be something that they have listed rooms on a short-term rental platform. So that might be okay because a motel or hotel doesn't have to get any special uses. They should be paying their TLT, and they probably are. But we'll just need to check the data to verify those. And if anyone couldn't see those, these squares here are kind of what James was talking about. And so those are the sorts of things where they're shown as inactive. We don't really know.
We have a record that at some point the city touched them, but Rentalscape isn't seeing them as currently active listings.
Where's the Allison on there?
What's up your
So they're
business?
go-
It's hidden.
No, that's downtown. So
Well,
Oh, that's,
yeah,
what's
that-
the- oh, this
that's
is
the
just the
top.
thing.
Underneath that, though.
and underneath
There
the pop-up.
weren't any.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
There
Is
weren't
it-
any active lists.
should be-
No.
So that's why I put the box up there with downtown.
I'm sure you guys probably know this, but the Allison pays the lion's share of our TLT taxes.
Yes.
They are very,
That would make sense.
I say I
they're very diligent
I would
about
hope
making
so.
sure we get paid.
Yeah.
I gave you the Best Western example. I wanted to jump in with a different one. So some of the color coding on the base layer here is residential or red commercial.
Yeah, well, so the red and orange are planning, or, yeah.
Challenge.
So the orange itself is planning commission. So if there's a rental there, it has to be a type 3, a go to planning commission. The red and yellow are type 2 staff level review.
And how about the blue?
That is not permitted in that zone.
I see.
A lot of those tend to be.
Industrial, open space.
One of the other things I wanted to point out as, it was a good question that Commissioner Newton Curtis had, was, is there a reason some would not be fully licensed? Basically would not have all three, would not have a permit, a business license, or a TFT, where they just have some. And there are situations where they might not require all three of those. And so, for example, if you were operating something shaped like a vacation rental home, but you're doing it in the C3 zone, then you might not need to go get a permit, because you might have a permitted use to have that kind of use. We would just refer to it for planning purposes as a hotel or motel use, because we have a fairly broad definition of what that is. So, and ours are considered excludable from one another. The definition do that. So you're either a hotel or motel, you're a bed and breakfast, or you're a vacation rental home.
But, and kind of once the platform is kind of up and running longer, kind of, that will be part of the verification process of staff going in and saying, okay, that yellow dot actually is a hotel verified because it doesn't need X, Y, or Z. So kind of as this gets up and running and staff verifies things.
The question was answered earlier, what percentage would it be of the total TLT revenue? So we saw $60,000-70,000. The first quarter is behind us, and we are on track with what we thought we would do this year, so not higher or less. The budget year assumes $1.114 million total as the city portion of TLT. So it would be, I don't know, whatever that would be divided.
It's about the 10.
So that's the portion on rental escape. So are there any kind of other big questions before we move on to the discussion portion of the evening?
Looks really good. I mean, powerful.
All right, well, I'll turn it back over to Clay to kick us off.
All right, so on the next slide, here we've got a few prompts. So our goal is not to belabor the issue tonight. Our goal is to have it so that you all share with each other some of the experiences that you've had. Because the role of the planning commission is different. They're seeing individual projects come forward that may or may not be contentious, that may or may not have public comments, that may be home share, they may be the whole property. And so they get to see those individual cases over and over again. Typically anywhere from, it's not uncommon for them to have 2 in a given month, for example. And that's been the case since about 2021, 2022 or so. The commissioners are welcome to correct me if that sounds inaccurate.
It feels like more of it.
Yeah.
That's probably
It's
accurate.
it's part of their, it's definitely been part of their bread and butter since I got here in 2022. So that's why I started with them at the top. Just as reminders, the right side of this slide shows a couple of the policy areas that we've generally talked about. The number of vacation rentals, the permitting processes they go through, what we refer to as grandfathering amortization. We talk about that in the white paper that you all have been shown at some point in the past. Some of the reporting requirements, and then compliance and enforcement. One of the things that, if it comes up, I've got hard copies of some of our key definitions and some of our conditional use permit criteria and our special use permit criteria. I don't really want to go into that level of detail unless you all start actually talking about those things. I would rather just have you talk to each other. But we've got a couple of those got a little fact sheet that I can hand out if it gets necessary. But I wanted to start with the planning commissioners and ask you to share some of the engagement with community members and a little bit about the conditional use permit process from your side of receiving those, and share some of the concerns or the things that you've heard that have felt. I've heard you all use the term rubber stamp when you feel like you're required to rubber stamp things. So if you could explain what you've experienced with that, and then also if you want to bring in livability and the issues we struggle with around that, which is an undefined term in our code. about when something may or may not impact livability, then I'd be happy to, I mean, I think it could be
Do you want us all
beneficial.
to just comment or?
I mean, how the commissioners would like to
Yeah,
share it.
why don't we just go around the table?
And I guess kind of just one thing, just to echo Clay's comment, so, I mean, as you saw on that timeline, there will be a lot of meetings for recommendations from planning commission and decisions by city council. So this is not a decision-making kind of conversation, it's more just about, you know, telling people kind of what you hear in your PC or CC role, just kind of getting us all on the same page as we start the project.
Good clarification. Jason, you want to start or Brad begin?
Well, yeah, we can go that way or go that way or sure, yeah, as I recall, it was, my memory being chair in 2019 was the last time, and I seem to recall that's when it really started to be more noticeable for the amount of applications. As Clay was talking about, most of them are non-contentious at all. It's they come in, I want to do this, okay, you're in compliance or you're not. If you are, good, and away with you. And not much more to it than that. And it's only when neighbors come in and typically they don't have anything specific in their complaints, the neighbors or the surrounding people. It's more about, I have a general complaint about, I don't want all this extra traffic there. It's not even that they know that there's gonna be extra traffic, but the perception of this thing is going to create it, even if it's not, or it will, I mean. And it's a little, so it's, you know, you can generally classify that as not in my backyard a little bit. But at the same time, you know, I'd say it's probably on the order of 25% of the ones that come in and have somebody that's seriously objecting like that is. And a lot of that comes down to enforcement. But then that comes back into, okay, do we have the manpower for enforcement? The cops are stretched thin. Code enforcement stretched thin, and so you kind of give them an unsatisfactory answer either way. And that's, I think there's friction on that level. Yeah, I mean, it's, as Will was just saying earlier, it's hard to break this whole issue down into, okay, this is a logical thing, we logically progress from here, but it's, you know, it's costing us money or this or that. It's more about, okay, are people okay with this process? And people, you know, feel like they're not being screwed over, and you try to mitigate that as much as possible, right? Yeah.
I'd like to kind of piggyback on that. So if anyone has the attachment 1 from the document today, there's on page 3, there's the direction from city council, the work areas that were outlined. I thought was very thorough, and I really appreciated something so concisely brought down from a lot of the points that we've heard from citizens. One of the things that, based on all of the feedback that we have heard from the planning commission, from residents of neighbors that are getting turned into short-term rentals, I thought, to me, based on the feedback that we've heard, which we could get into the minutia of, but we've done that for you. So the point being, what we have heard, I thought number 5 was a really and particularly important component based on what I have heard from people. I think that was something that we didn't fully understand going into this, is that once it was approved for a short-term rental, that stays with the property. It doesn't necessarily stay with the owner, so you could buy a house and have it already approved. So that seemed like something that was just one of those things that could get really out of control really quickly, could cause a really slippery slope. And I think once the neighbors of the short-term rental applicants were starting to discover this, then they realized the long-term effects that could be for their property. And it was the other one. The other thing which specific work area, I apologize, I forget which one it was, there were 13 years. It doesn't seem to end in the, that it goes with the property, not the person. And also what we talked a lot about was how to limit them so they don't get out of control as well. I live in a part of town where a bunch on one street have almost all exclusively been turned into short-term rentals. So Clay had done some great research in one of our work sessions where they were looking at like a coastal town that has like per square mile, they have X amount, or per block you could only have, because what we're seeing now is little clusters, which from an independent homeowner's position makes sense. You live close to 99, like it's an attractable area, you want that walkability to the downtown. There is a concentration there, as we saw from the map. But to be able to try and limit it so that the entire concentration doesn't happen in one area and just, it comes back to that livability. And how the three steps that Wayne pointed out at the beginning of this meeting was like, how do we create it to like both encourage tourism and engage with the wine country that we are and accept that we live in an amazing spot that people want to come to be, but also not turn it into maybe a coastal town where it's almost exclusively rentals and it loses all of the locality, like the local that we live here for. So that was the two big things that I really took away from the immense amount of local feedback was how we keep it from being a forever thing, like once this house is sold, that the new owner would need to reapply for an application. And that we keep it so that it's not too concentrated in any given area where there is a cap, whether that be per square mile or per block or what have you, there needs to be something to keep it from being overwhelmed, like just cannibalizing a particular area at a time. I thought, other than the safety concerns that are all mostly quite fair, that a lot of people in the area would have without not knowing who they are, having to call the cops if it's a little too loud after 10. There are a lot of very valid concerns, but those are the main ones that I seem to pull away that seem to be most on point with the top three livability. And that sort of component from a Newberg perspective.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you, Lainey. I think one of the issues is very much the density. I know a street where there are 3 houses, one after another. They're all vacation houses, and I think one of the issues with that is that they remain empty for extended periods of time. I don't think that's good. I think that actually encourages vandalism. I mean, touch wood, that hasn't happened as far as I know, at the moment. But I think it does encourage vandalism, but really density and what that does to the livability within a neighborhood. I think that's huge. I mean, as I was reading through this, I noticed that, there was something in here about 2% of the number of houses in the city could be a vacation house. I think that's great. I think that's very reasonable. But I think in association with that 2%, if that's the final number that we go with, there should be, as you said, something around density. I think there's a huge issue if you have children in the neighborhood and so many of the houses remain empty for extended period of time. I think that does impact livability. And I kind of disagree with you a little bit, Jason, in the number of people that have complained. I think one of the problems is, and I've mentioned this before to Clay, and then I didn't do anything about it, but that aside, I think one of the issues is with the letters that go out when they're alerting the different neighbors about a vacation rental that's, possibly going to be in the neighborhood. Right on the second page of that, it talks about the code and how if you have a disagreement, then it's got to be related to the code. I don't think most people get as far as the second page. I think they read the first page and they have a kind of, oh my God, kind of reaction, but they don't realize that they then need to actually go to the city and familiarize themselves with what those codes are so that they can come back to the planning committee and say, okay, well, according to this code, such and such and such is whatever it happens to be, and this is why I disagree with this. And I think there are going to be some code changes or some changes with those letters that go out, but I think that's a really important point. I don't think the community is educated enough in how they can reliably and effectively combat, and that's probably not a great word, but you know what I mean, go against a vacation rental. What was the other thing I was going to say? There was something else I was thinking about. Definitely the density, the codes. I don't know. I think that's it for now.
Let's move on around. We can come back if you remember.
Yeah. I'm fairly new to the planning commission. So I'm still trying to get my rhythm a little bit, but I have spent, quite a bit of time on the Affordable Housing Commission. And what I have seen or my experience has been really affordability of, or availability of long-term rentals. And the short-term rentals or investment properties, they're being used for STRs, and there's not a whole lot available for younger people to want to live here because there's no long-term rentals available. That's some of the feedback that I've gotten recently, having children at that age where they want to move out of the home. It's hard for them to do that. And if there is something available, it seems like the property values have gone up so much too. And I think that's directly impacted by a lot of these STRs. As well, they get higher income for them, higher rental income. That's been kind of my general experience here recently.
I wanted to wrap on like two other things really quick, and thank you for that, because it's another great perspective too, and kind of tying back in what Clay was talking about with rubber stamping, which I know Linda and I especially have been feeling very run down with, because we get the people coming to us very angry with very valid concerns. And when the definition of livability is so vague in the code that we can't uphold their concerns, that they don't necessarily understand why, because they're frustrated and they don't take the time to look at that second page. What citizen is going to take the time to go read the code and understand why we can or cannot uphold something? The lack of clarity within the code to be able to uphold that has been the crux of a lot of the issue that we have been facing. But also I wanted to point out, because it was, so thank you for those numbers, by the way, for what I think was about 5% of the annual.
Approximately, yeah.
So I like to point out too, because I think there was another commissioner who rightly pointed out that it's not that big on an annual scale. It's not the TCT that we would get from that isn't necessarily maybe worth the fight or the time when we have to be very conscientious of where our city employees are spending their time and what we're using that for. I would like to point out that well, I think is a valid point and should be considered. It is back to that livability. And it's not just about the revenue that we are missing out on. It's the fact that the people who are taking the time to try and stay above board and come to us with the proper, who wants to go through the permits and go to the city and not go to city hall because it's flooded. They're taking the time to try and be really good citizens. And it's been very difficult for a lot of people. And it seems like the people that are getting heck for doing it, and those who are going behind the radar and not paying their TCT are getting rewarded. We want to try and create a better program for the city in the long term, where we can have longer term rentals that sustain maybe more youthful demographic that is able to live here in the long term, not just make it that destination. Yes, it might not be like the biggest annual revenue stream that we could be funneling through the city right now, but it is a long-term effect that we are seeing at a very concentrated time that we now know needs a long-term solution.
But I think also getting back to this idea of livability, I think as a city, we need to think about what livability does mean. I think it's more than just having 2 spaces for a car. And I can't remember the other things that, that are a part of that. But I think we do need to really think about livability for the neighborhood. When you have neighbors, and I think I've made this point before, neighbors are people that you can rely on. Not all neighbors are great neighbors, it's true, but at least you know what you're getting. And you know which ones you can rely on if you need to get help from them, or if they need to get help from you, frankly. I think that's important. I just go back to Mr. Rogers and his neighborhood. But I mean, that's what communities are made of. They're made of people knowing each other. I think it's really important that we do think about tourism. I think that's an important part of this area. But it's also important to think about the community itself that is maintained and sustained while we're thinking about tourism as well.
Defining art, like defining livability is like so difficult.
But I think it also could,
Yeah, but it's,
but
yeah,
but I think it can also
hard to
come back to
define.
this idea of density.
and I know you and I lean on that a lot.
Yeah.
too, So, yeah.
All right, let's keep moving now. The city council. Share feedback received at the 2024 listening inspection. I think we were all there. Does this modify the project scope of work? Elise, you wanna check that off?
Sure. I live in the downtown corridor. And so what we, some of the, so you want me to share what we heard at the listening session primarily, or?
We aren't limited to sharing just that, but that's one of the things that James and I weren't around for. So
Oh,
that would,
sure.
so that would be great for us to know, but also general feelings on the scope of work. Did we hear you all correctly? And have your feelings about the assignment you gave us in March, has that changed as a result of that event in August?
I feel like planning commission is very in tune with the same sort of feedback that I've been receiving as well. I feel like very, very similar sentiments on both sides, and I think that both sides of the coin understand the other side of the coin. I don't know. I don't know if it's just me or maybe, I don't know, generation, I don't know, but I obviously too really love the thought of like really knowing your neighbors and having community, but I also feel really strongly that, you know, I feel strongly around private property rights and someone's ability to make their own decisions of their property. I also balance just knowing that we have a structural deficit that has to be addressed in some mechanism. And so what revenue source do we want to do? And Will has worked so hard to get as lean as possible, and there really is nowhere else to lean down. And so, we're gonna have to make hard financial decisions as a city council next year, I think, and I can't really fathom decreasing TLT dollars at this moment in time, so.
But I don't think we're talking about decreasing at this point. We're talking about,
Well, but if we talk about long-term effects, if we were to say, because those houses will turn over, they will sell those houses, and if we were to make a change that it doesn't move with the property. But I do like the idea of having some sort of cap, or not like Dundee, but some sort of cap that feels reasonable, within, certain block radius, like you were speaking about, Amy. But I know there's a lot of really passionate people in my neighborhood that feel very strongly that we need to decrease the amount of short-term rentals that we're approving. I mean, I hear that very often when I'm out knocking doors. So, yeah.
Mike?
Well, I think you need to find a balance. I wouldn't want to have it explode one way or the other. I don't know if I agree with the idea of, I'm not concerned about whether they're sitting empty or not, because if they're not in good shape and good condition, then that becomes an eyesore, and then I would be concerned. But I look to property rights. I agree. If somebody buys something and that's what they want to do, I think they have a right to do that. I don't want to tell somebody that they can't turn a place into a short-term rental. But you also have to look at the money that comes into this community. I mean, it's not just the TLC. They're spending money on gas, they're going out to eat, they're doing a variety of different things. And so they're spending hundreds of dollars for maybe a week or 3 or 4 days or whatever it might be. So, I think we need to find a good balance. And just, we go in that direction. I mean, we're not in a situation where like Lincoln City, and I understand the problems that they're facing, we're not at that spot, but if we keep an eye on it and we just have a balance. I think it's fine to keep going the way we are.
Even if the density increases in the downtown,
If the what increases,
the density of vacation homes.
I'm okay with that. If that's what people want, that brings them to our town, they spend money here. They're gonna be kept up because you're not gonna get somebody renting there if it looks like, you know, it's run down and it's in shambles.
But don't you think there should be a balance between the
Yes.
maintaining a neighborhood and having it just comprised of every third or fourth house a vacation house?
Yeah, but nobody has a sign out there necessarily saying vacation rental, vacation. I mean, well, they might have a little sign out there. I don't know if that's, you know, they might, I mean, I see that over at the coast. Maybe we don't have it here, but.
I think we do.
But I've
Short term.
driven around Newberg thousands and thousands of times, and I don't go, oh, dang. Here's 4 houses right in a row that are, I have no idea whether they are or not, and to me. I'm okay if there were 4 there, I don't really know it. But if there were 4 houses that looked like garbage, then I got a problem with that.
No, and I think, you know, when I look at the vacation houses, they are in great shape.
Right.
I mean, they're in better shape than many of the other houses around, because you're right, nobody's gonna rent a place if it looks poorly maintained.
And
But I think my perception is that if there's 4 or more than 4, actually, in many places in a row, then it may not affect those people that do not live in that neighborhood, because yeah, you don't know whether it's a rental property or not, and it looks great. I mean, gosh, all the bushes are trimmed, the paint's not flaking. But what I think it does do is impact the livability of those individual houses that are embedded within those multiple vacation rentals.
Yeah.
That would be my perspective.
Well, when this came out in March, that was a little bit before my time, but at the same time, the most complaints I've ever heard from anybody was parking in Newberg, so that's about the gist of that, but I'm in agreement with both Elise and Mike both saying that it's somebody's property, they can do what they want with it. I don't like the eyesores, but they seem to keep them up, and I don't know what. When you mentioned livability, I don't know. Because I don't have a lot of vacation homes around me, how that actually would impact me if the houses around me were rentals. And all like that, but. Again, if it's a person's property, I don't think we should take that away from them because. There's 3 in a row or 4 in a row or whatever it may be, so.
If I may offer just one real life experience, because there was one in particular that was on my blog, I believe I disclosed it just in the proximity, but not impacting my ability. The 2 gentlemen that spoke, 2 of the many people that spoke in opposition of a particular spot that was going up. It was adjacent to my block. They said, I don't want someone in my backyard looking in, and then the other guy said, all the other surrounding properties to my house are already short-term rentals, and if you make this one, it will be at the opposing house, and I will be completely surrounded. And you're right, they do look a lot better. I'm not personally concerned from the vandalization standpoint. I don't think that that's a concern I've experienced. But I was really sad after that meeting because I did approve it because they did everything right and all of the things were checked. But both of those men moved the next few months. They put their houses up and left. And so I just personally felt guilty because they came to the planning commission and said, please don't do this. It's impacting livability. And then they both sold their homes and they both left, and
What was the reasoning, just?
they're completely surrounded by short-term rentals, and they didn't feel like it was.
But how does that impact livability?
They didn't want to.
I have
live
people
there.
around me and I've lived where people are around me. And I don't have any idea whether my neighbor goes and sticks his head over and looks in my backyard. I don't know, but I don't see, I wrestle with how does it impact live, that's a word that's not used, I don't think, in the proper context.
Well, this is why we're talking about. this,
Well, I know,
Because this is all
That's
we
why I'm
heard.
trying- I'm trying to grapple, I don't understand where it's coming from,
I think
guess.
it comes from the idea of community. And if you have lots of people moving in and out, empty houses around you, then you don't have the kind of local community that you would have if you had more sustained neighbours. I think that's where livability comes in. I mean, one of the things that we've done recently in Newberg.
Excuse me, just a minute. We're making the same point over and over, and that's just gonna make the meeting take longer. I mean,
All right,
we hear
I'll shut up. I'll shut up.
We heard, we got your point, and we've heard it, so, Robin.
I actually was on the short-term rental ad hoc committee and we wrestled with, all the pros and cons of everything. I've watched numerous planning commission meetings, so I know what you guys go through. But ultimately, the group, we really did side with property rights. And I have a short-term rental in my neighborhood, that one up there. I hear the noise. I do think, and talking with people, I have talked to a few people that have these rentals. And some of them, and I've also heard this, if they're not being rented, they go to something else. I mean, this is a market-driven business. If
Excuse me, what do you mean they go to something else?
they do a long-term rental
I see.
or a midterm.
Okay.
They have to pay their mortgage.
Right.
Yeah, and I am
Okay.
hearing that from people, so I'm wondering if our short-term rental market is maybe maxed out. We don't have as many coming on this year. But it's a market-driven thing. People are going to, if they don't make money doing it, they're gonna find something else, and I'm hearing that from a few people that do this. Also, what I've heard is homeowners like flexibility. There's a lot of people that live here that travel to other states for business or for family. And, while they're not home, they wanna maybe make a little income on their home. Which I think is better than having it sit empty. But, and if we put a cap on it, we're kind of taking away homeowner rights, flexibility. And the other thing that we have discussed, we did propose a 2% overall cap. We didn't talk about, in neighborhoods. So what you guys are talking about, how there's one rental and the rest, well, they're all rentals, but one homeowner, the rest are rentals. What would you call that, Clay? Doing what is,
like
not an overall cap, but a cap.
Oh, a density-based cap?
Yeah.
Something like that?
We did discuss that, but, community development was concerned how we would monitor that, how we would judge where we could, where the fine line would be. Is it this block or is it that house or is it? So that was the concern, but we did discuss that. So ultimately, that's kind of what I've heard is the market will dictate. People still want to be able to do what, if they're not renting them, they'll go to something else. But I do feel for your streets where you guys are the only one that would be difficult.
Abby, did we skip you? Do you have an opinion? Do you?
I don't really have personal experience with living around rental homes, but I agree with keeping the rights of the owners, and like if they want to do rental housing, like that I don't think that would really affect the livability as much as other things will. So I think keeping.
I did quite a little bit of study while we were going through the ad hoc. There was a study done by the University of Houston, along with some other universities, about this particular subject and how much having vacation rentals in a neighborhood affects that neighborhood. And their conclusions were that the difference in the crime caused by a neighborhood that has them is insignificant from the other houses in the neighborhood. I'm glad that you pointed out that houses being vacant is a self-correcting problem, because you're right, everybody has mortgages to pay. And if people aren't renting their houses on a regular basis, they will have to find a different source of income than what they have. All that being said, I have horror stories of neighbors who have long-term rentals in their neighborhood and would love very much to see some of them move out. And I could give you addresses, if you happen to live, near Cal Rath's house. You could live 3 blocks away or you're complaining about what's going on in that house, and there's several of those around. There was a gentleman who, for lack of a better term, was, created a shop in his driveway in the road in front of his house, and the neighbor across the street wanted to sell his house. And he had this horrible eyesore there, so that's what encouraged him to get involved with the code enforcement officer, and they finally come to some sort of resolution. I don't know if the house ever got sold, never looked into it again. But the beauty of short-term rentals, as far as a neighbor is first of all, they're responsible people. They have credit cards on file. They have their name. If they create any problem or break any laws, it's very easy to chase them down and take care of that problem. So I hear you. I understand people don't want densities in their neighborhood, and we talked about this in the ad hoc committee quite a bit. By the way, the ad hoc committee had one person that was against them, one person that was for them, and one person that had them in his neighborhood and didn't really like them. So it was a good diverse group, and the discussions between these 3 were fascinating, because they would eventually come together and compromise and make a decision. And that's where the 2% cap came from. It's not a perfect solution, but it's a good solution. It makes sure, as you mentioned, that we're not driving up the cost of real estate, because half the houses in town are short-term rentals. So.
May I pull back to one thing?
Sure.
The one thing I do want to, again, come back to, because I think it is an utmost importance, is on the work area number 5, as per attachment 1. I'll just state it for the record, considering amending Newberg Municipal Code 15.445 special use standards that indicate that vacation rental homes use the approach to be transferable to the subsequent owners. That seems to be, like you said, maybe not the perfect, but a perfectly reasonable consideration to take into account, taking into consideration personal property rights and the concerns of the citizens.
I agree. I don't understand why that was in there in the first place. We did decide to make it not go with the property, right?
That's the recommendation.
Yeah.
And one of the things actually that came out of the rental scape that we're initially looking at, is James has kind of mentioned, there are some that appear to be inactive. So it does, if there's a density-based cap and then they go inactive, but it runs with the land. So all of a sudden we have these kind of ones that are just lingering out there as like zombie short-term rentals, which could have a different kind of impact later down the road once we fill it, if they just kind of gradually accumulate. So that's not
Part of the
necessary.
code that it falls, if it falls into this like
If
purgatory that they just like.
If they're not gonna be done under a
Yeah.
conditional use permit, for example, or if we just put it in the code that there's, that it runs with the applicant or something else, we can. That can be addressed, but it's something that's in there to be considered, and that's why it's the scope of work.
And I think one comment on that, and not to get too, deep into this meeting, but, that is applicable to conditional use permits. So there's a distinction of not all vacation rentals run with it, and so that's kind of a code question on how that gets implemented, but it's kind of a quirk of Newberg's process.
Now, another recommendation that we made was to change from a type 3 to a type 2 land use approval. So that means that it's not going to come to the planning commission every time and you're not gonna, because as you said earlier, when you listen to the neighbors make these impassioned pleas, and yet they follow the law. So there's nothing you can do. So the group felt that our planning department was perfectly capable of making those decisions, and so we made the type 2 so that it doesn't come to you. Only the type 3 will from now on.
It's about to put us out of business.
I was just gonna make a very brief observation that if there is a 2% cap and it doesn't move with the property, you will have the natural effect of moving the pieces around the chessboard,
Totally.
which will help reduce that density, because I'm super blessed to have all my neighbors. I know them all, they're all my friends, but if it started to change,
Yeah.
it would be nice to see folks would float off and go to other locations when the houses turn over.
I think that was the last point I did want to make, and thank you. The combination of those two, not to the extent that the citizens that have voiced their opinions may want, would definitely help find a better balance for the city as a whole.
You combine that with the market forces that,
Yes.
Councilor Wheatley was talking about too. But I think a lot of this whole thing is driven by the rise of Airbnb. And when that starts to, find its level, it's all this market forces that are creating the incentive to have all these rental properties is going to have find its level as well.
Also keeping in mind that we're exploding in development. And there's a lot of places that are gonna be online at the volume, so it could be a good extra balance, but a huge amount of residential areas that haven't been finished yet.
James, I think we hit those four pretty good.
Yeah.
Mark?
Yeah. On the next slide, you'll just see that it says.
Maybe.
That's all we had. So there's
That's
no,
all
so
folks.
that is the discussion. And so if there's anything that, there's something about impacts, concerns, what you've heard from residents, that you haven't had a chance to share with the group at this point, that would be valuable. If there's something specific that you think needs to be modified in the scope of work, that would be valuable for James and I. If you think it looks good to go and you just want us to roll and get moving, then I would say we're happy to do so. And I would like to request that everyone here help us get people showing up at our public engagement we have coming up in November and December. So specifically, there can be a lot of power in just bringing 1, 2, or 3 people, or encouraging those 1, 2, or 3 people to show up at an event. So you don't have to invite the entire city. Just those couple of people that have banged on your door or complained at you and you haven't been able to give them something concrete. This is not something that's at least more concrete that you can give them.
And again, we'll be having kind of one in person for the general public, one virtual, and then one kind of targeted at rental operators and kind of
That's a good point. The one that's targeted at rental operators, it's still open to the public. You don't have to be an operator to go there. But the questions that we ask are going to be a little bit more about feasibility. That if we have a policy like this, what does that do to you as an operator? Something that we might not get in a general session, or if we asked everyone that, they might be like, well, I don't want you running it, so I don't care. So we're trying to give an opportunity and be understanding of those who do operate those. We're not trying to do policies that turn what they do into a great hardship for them. We want them to be able to keep doing it, but at the same time in a way that works for the rest of the community.
So we're doing good. We got at least another 15 minutes if we want to go ahead and have more discussion.
Not to beat a little bit of a dead horse, but the livability issue. So I remember looking this up once upon a time, not specifically livability, but I believe it's, if I'm remembering correctly, it's a legal concept since we're acting as quasi-judicial judges, and these particular types of things. So the legal concept, I believe, if I remember correctly, is a legal construction. And basically what it says is when you have your opening statement, you have all these things to facilitate livability and to provide a better community and blah, 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 all this kind of, platitudes. You have your criteria. By meeting these criteria, you meet these platitudes. So that's the idea of saying, okay, these people have met these criteria, therefore they're in compliance with the law. And since they're in compliance with the law, they have created something livable or, community, all this stuff. So under that theory, if you were to add another criteria, because you feel that the existing criteria doesn't create these things that you said up there at the top, now you have further created this thing. And so if you can come up with a criteria that is not being met, that needs to be added, then you can do something. Until then, you're just kind of talking about, nebulous things. So that'd be my 2 cents. And I'm not an attorney, but boy, long time is making me.
One
Too much.
Well, not to, as you said, beat it or whatever it was, but ChatGPT
Oh.
mentions each city or neighborhood may emphasize different criteria based on the priorities and demographics of its residents. But these core categories, I'm looking at the wrong piece, social cohesion, strong neighborhood ties, and sense of community among residents. And I think that's what we shouldn't lose, is having a sense of community among our residents. And I think if you have a density that's too high, I know I'm repeating myself, in vacation rentals, then I think to some extent you lose that sense of community among residents
Has
because there
ChatGPT
is
been
a lack
recognized by the
of
mayor?
residents. What's
I
that?
say, has ChatGPT been recognized by the mayor to weigh in? at the-
Oh, I'm sorry, we should have brought him in earlier.
And one of the things I wanted to mention, if the counselors aren't as aware, that one of the conditional use permit criteria uses the term livability, but it's also not defined in our code, which is really problematic when it goes to a hearing and you have an applicant that wants something and you have neighbors who are concerned about what that something could do to their neighborhood. And so it becomes a highly subjective thing. So maybe it's something that we consider if there's a way for us to resolve that as part of our scope of work by even defining.
It's just, it's the crux of so many of the meetings we've had is why.
I think that's so challenging.
Yeah.
So there are some factors that some people consider important for livability that just other people think are beyond the pale.
Yeah.
So.
The word harmony is also in that criteria.
Yeah.
Which is also highly subjective, and it's intended to be somewhat subjective. That is the point of going from ministerial to administrative to a discretionary decision-making body like the planning commission and even higher to the city council. You guys only get the tough stuff. We don't give you the easy stuff, that's for staff.
Yep,
Now, as far as livability goes, as of 2022, we now, your neighbor's house can be torn down and they can build an apartment complex in it. It's a statewide law, we cannot refuse it. It's gonna come to planning and you're gonna have to pass it on, even though you're gonna have 7 or 8 neighbors saying, wait a minute, this is our one neighborhood, and suddenly we have a multifamily in this neighborhood. That changes the character, that hurts livability, yet it's state law, you can't deny it. So I'm not sure what livability means in state law terms these days.
Then if livability is something that we can't define, maybe it should be taken out.
That's really the direction that we can.
Harmony too.
We can.
You know, when you start dealing with, you know,
To a vote.
both ends of this, yeah, you deal with both ends of the spectrum,
Two things.
that's, one's harmony is another person's, you know,
7,500.
It's also
Mike, did you have your hand up there?
Well, I was just gonna say that, you know, you made a comment about people that are long-term renters, you know, and in my neighborhood is an older neighborhood, and you know, I don't know. Well, I do know of one house, because they actually have a sign out there, but I mean, there are people that are long-term renters that I wished it was a short-term rental because it would look better.
Renters don't mow their lawns, do they?
Yeah, you know, but, yeah,
Then on the other hand, I have a long-term rental and my renters are wonderful.
There are.
There are many.
again, it's.
Right. There's good and bad on every side.
Yep, I think that's probably the.
You guys wanna?
Oh, sorry.
Let's roll it back in.
Sorry, we're solving the problems with the state.
Exactly.
Go ahead, you wanna
You solved it, great.
Oh, you solved it already?
We're talking, so livability was the one problem, and then the other problem was density, and we're complaining to each other, rightfully so. The density issue is exactly what you just said, that it's dictated from on high, because if you were to put it to a vote in Newberg, they would almost certainly go with, okay, we want 7,500 square foot lot or 10,000 square foot lot for R1 and not the 5,000 we have now. But it doesn't matter because it's dictated from the state.
Yeah.
And then, well, then that's dictated from Portland, and then Mr. Worthy was saying, and then I said, I had heard a really good idea one time. And I'll put it on the record, because what the heck? What states need is a statewide electoral college, is so. The US as a body, back in the day from founding fathers has the electoral college, so that they're not ruled by just the cities, just the population centers, and so if states had that. then you wouldn't have the state of Portland, you'd have the state of Oregon, because, Washoe County or all these other counties, Malheur County would have more say proportionally than, one little neighborhood in Washington County.
That bit I didn't agree with.
You did not agree with. Jason?
Yeah, they give a different question, a different
I
solution.
did
I
not
agree.
agree with that solution. I do wish that there was more latitude for cities in Oregon to make up their own decisions about what they want in their own cities.
We're gonna fix that. We're gonna fix that, Will.
Well, I would like to point out that the state senator that sponsored that bill and wrote that bill is now our governor, so. That's where we are.
The
But
density
you're
bill?
right, from the beginning of time, R1 neighborhoods have meant something. All the houses are residential, and now that's not the case. Any place you can build one house, you can build seven. But
Well,
I
so
was just, Clay,
the ability and density and development standards associated with that are not what James and I will be working on for this. But, if
Glad
you
to hear
want,
that
if
one.
you're interested in, us doing something, then just let us know. Jeremiah is gonna be bringing our work program sometime in a few months for an update to city council. But I think that unless someone's got something burning and pressing, and frankly, even if you think of it later and want to send it over to James and I, we will be working on this. This is intended as kind of a kickoff. But I'm dead serious about getting people to show up to that outreach. And it can be a real bummer when nobody shows up to those things or whatever. And one of the things we're gonna be doing is, we understand that we have existing conditions. We understand that there are recommendations we're asked to evaluate. And we understand that there are other alternatives that could have been chosen. So we're asking the public during the community outreach to come along with us and understand what we have now, understand the recommendations we have, and see if those are a good fit for Newberg. We're gonna share that there's some other alternatives out there. That kind of A and B is gonna be a big part of it, but we're not gonna tell them you only have these two choices. That's not real community engagement. So we're gonna try and show some of those other ones, and we're gonna bring back to the city council and the planning commission later in the process what we're hearing from them as we go forward. And so there will likely be a couple of policy-related decision points that are associated with the results of that community outreach. Maybe they're exactly aligned with what we already worked on. That would be fine. That would be pretty easy. But if they deviate substantially, then the city council will know that and will adjust accordingly. And then we'll move into drafting the documents and the amendments, and then we'll take it to planning commission, and then it'll come back to city council. So that's how we think it can move along smoothly. And that's all.
comment.
Okay, I'm looking at the PowerPoint or whatever it's task 5. I think it's on page 8. It talks about DLCD post acknowledgement plan amendment. What is that? And then also under that, it says measure 56 noticing if required.
So those are administrative things that staff have to worry about, and typically city council does not.
Okay, so I saw measure 56. Do we have to put this on the ballot?
No, so if we make a change that could, per the state's definition, affect someone's property value by changing the uses that are allowed at it, basically by limiting their uses of their property, then we have to do a notice to any potentially impacted parties. In this case, if it's determined that we need to do a measure 56, which is not known yet, because it just depends on what's proposed, then we could have to do a mailing to the city. Now, we've done that in other projects. We've done it in things like our multifamily housing code audit. We've done it for our middle housing land divisions type items. And then even recently, we've done it for the area associated with the new zoning district for the craft industrial zone. That was a small area because it was only that specific new area. So if it's something where there are uses that people used to be able to do and those go away, that is typically one of the most obvious triggers for measure 56, is if you make it so people can do fewer things. That's it in a nutshell.
So before we adjourn, we have 3 people that have been sitting back there not saying a word. I wonder if any of you have anything to say. Okay, Lee, Scott.
I will say the obligatory thank you for getting through people, because it's so important that staff has clear direction in terms of the scope, and that's the battle that so I appreciate it. And I think one other thing I do in this, but I didn't say, as we go through this process and we do that alternatives analysis play, we're hearing different perspectives from the community. Of course, we'll bring that to the planning commission and city council. We also have an obligation to sort of look at this through the lens of, how do we administer this? Like, what are the pros and cons? Is there an additional cost to be required to do this? We'll bring that information to the commission and council as well, so we can consider the pros and cons of those recommendations.
Lee?
I would just say that probably you don't think that I would say this, but regulations are actually a good thing for tourism and destination marketing. So people need to know what they can do and what they can't do, and they need to make it so that the residents are still happy to live here. That is not our goal, to market so that residents aren't happy. Because, you know, most of us live in this area and want it in the area. The complication that comes up that I think doesn't get talked about, that you just also need to make sure you know, is you're only talking about the city. So there are a lot of vacation rentals in the county.
And every one of them's illegal.
Yeah. And they're
And
not
one of them pays
for
the
auditor in any way, so. Just, you know.
Yeah, why are they illegal?
Why are they illegal?
Because they didn't get a conditional use permit?
Yeah, they don't have it, there's no way.
How do you know?
Hmm?
How do you know they could?
The county does not have,
Oh, they don't
There's
have
no
a program in
regulations.
place for that?
no,
Oh,
Not to up in a whole bag of worms there, but.
yeah,
Hold the topic.
But I'm all for it.
yeah. Well,
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
thanks, James.
thank you. Thanks, James. Thank
I would like to
Everybody, great.
speak on behalf of the council to the planning commission members, all of you. Thank you so much for the volunteer time that you do. It's a thankless job. It's an important job. And we've all watched your meetings. You guys handle it well. You handle it professionally. What can I say? I wish that, I talked to the city manager. I believe that we're gonna double your pay this year. So,
Excellent.
there's
Zero
that.
plus zero equals zero.
No, there's cookies.
If you catch me in the pub, I will buy you a pint.
All right.
Hey, worth it.
But anyway, thank you. Thank you for your volunteering. It's an important service you're providing to your community. And we listen to you. We hear this. Anybody else real quick?
I wanna know where Counselor Holland's getting her ads, done. I have to click off one of her YouTube ads, I swear, every day.
Nice.
You're right.
James.
Well, she,
No, I mean, it's effective, that's why I'm not complaining.
if you're gonna run for office, she will make her time available for a certain project.
Only for people I like.
Officially adjourned there?
We are adjourned.
All right, thank you.
Good, good, good.